The year is 2014. Across the Black Sea, a silent invasion begins. Masked soldiers without flags seize a peninsula, and the world's borders tremble once again. Europe hasn't seen this kind of aggression in generations, and suddenly the peace that millions took for granted begins to crack. In Washington and Brussels, the question echoes. If Russia can take Crimea, what stops them from taking more? Within days, US tanks begin to roll. American soldiers land in Poland, and what starts as a message soon becomes a movement, a living shield stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. This is not a war, it is a warning, a promise, a new line drawn in the soil of Europe. This is Operation Atlantic Resolve. In 2014, the world watched in disbelief as the map of Europe began to shift. Russian forces, swift, silent, and without insignia, moved into Crimea. Within weeks, the peninsula was under Russian control, annexed through force and wrapped in the illusion of a democratic vote. It was the first time since the Cold War that Europe had witnessed the redrawing of borders through military might. And for NATO, the message was unmistakable. The post-Cold War peace was broken. The world's most powerful alliance faced the very question it was created to answer. How do you stop an aggressor without starting a war? From that question, an operation was born, one that would span years, continents, and generations of soldiers. Its name, Operation Atlantic Resolve, a mission forged from uncertainty. It became the living heartbeat of NATO's defense in Europe. A deterrent, a symbol, and a shield. It began in the spring of 2014, as Russian troops consolidated their grip on Crimea and fueled unrest in eastern Ukraine. Alarm bells rang from Warsaw to Washington. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, felt the weight of history pressing on their borders. Poland, a nation all too familiar with invasion, sounded the alarm. In April, the United States launched a mission that would define a new era of transatlantic defense. Operation Atlantic Resolve was not an invasion. It was not a war. It was a message, visible, strategic, and unmistakable. That message: NATO stands together always. American forces began deploying on rotational tours throughout Eastern Europe. Armored brigades rolled into Poland, infantry companies trained in the Baltics, fighter jets roared over Romania and Bulgaria. It was not a show of aggression, but of assurance, proof that if any adversary dared test NATO's resolve, they would find American boots already on the ground. This was deterrence in motion, steel, strategy, and solidarity. Over the years, the operation evolved into a complex web of deployments spanning Europe. Each region had its role, each rotation its mission. In the north, across the frozen plains of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, American infantry trained side by side with local troops, learning the terrain, the tactics, and the resolve of nations that lived in Russia's shadow. Their focus was clear: defend the Suwałki Gap, the thin line of land separating NATO territory from the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad and the ally of Belarus. In Poland, armored brigades brought Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, and Paladin artillery systems. Massive convoys of steel thundered through quiet villages, their presence both reassuring to allies and unmistakable to potential foes. Further south, in Romania and Bulgaria, American aviation brigades brought the roar of Apache and Black Hawk helicopters. In Germany, logistics hubs coordinated a continent-spanning ballet of supply chains, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and soldiers, ensuring that if crisis struck, NATO could move like a single organism. Every deployment, every convoy, every training exercise was another thread woven into a defensive web designed to make aggression unthinkable. But Operation Atlantic Resolve was more than machinery and maneuvers. It was a crucible of unity. Each rotation brought soldiers from across the alliance, American, British, Polish, German, Romanian, training shoulder to shoulder, eating together, learning to fight as one. Exercises like Sabre Strike, Defender Europe, and Anaconda tested not just firepower but coordination, speed, and cohesion. They rehearsed the rapid movement of tens of thousands of troops across borders, exactly as they would if war ever came. The sound of engines, the chatter of radios, the thunder of live fire drills, all rehearsals for a conflict no one wanted but everyone had to be ready for. To the west of the Baltics lies Kaliningrad, a small yet heavily fortified Russian exclave, bristling with missiles, warships, and aircraft. Once part of East Prussia, it now stands as a forward dagger pointed toward NATO's flank. For military planners, Kaliningrad was both a threat and a test. If war ever broke out, could NATO reinforce the Baltics before Russia closed the Suwałki Gap? Operation Atlantic Resolve's very purpose was to make sure the answer would always be yes. As the years passed, the operation settled into a rhythm, a heartbeat of deterrence pulsing quietly across Europe. In 2015, the first American armored convoys crossed through Eastern Europe, greeted by cheering civilians waving American and NATO flags. By 2017, NATO itself had expanded its presence through the Enhanced Forward Presence Initiative, permanent multinational battalions stationed in Poland and the Baltics, complementing the US rotations under Atlantic Resolve. The operation had become a living promise that Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, an attack on one is an attack on all, was not just ink on paper, but soldiers in the field. Then came 2022 on February 24th. The world awoke to the sound of sirens, explosions, and disbelief. Russian missiles streaked across the dawn sky. Columns of tanks rolled into Ukraine from every direction. The full-scale invasion had begun. For NATO and the United States, the stakes shifted overnight. Operation Atlantic Resolve, once a precaution, now became the frontline defense for the rest of Europe. In the days that followed, American forces surged eastward. From roughly 6,000 troops, the U.S. presence in Europe expanded to nearly 100,000, the largest in decades. New deployments flooded into Poland, Romania, and the Baltics. F-35 fighters patrolled the skies. Battle groups doubled in size. The shield had held, and now it was being reinforced. As the war in Ukraine dragged on, Operation Atlantic Resolve adapted to a new reality. What began as a temporary mission evolved into a permanent operation. In July 2023, the U.S. Army officially designated Atlantic Resolve as a named operation, elevating its status, funding, and long-term structure. This wasn't just symbolism. It was a strategic declaration. The United States was committing indefinitely to the defense of Europe's eastern flank. Across the continent, new infrastructure took shape. In Poland, permanent bases rose with hardened shelters, advanced radar systems, and pre-positioned munitions ready to mobilize at a moment's notice. In Romania, air defense networks expanded, while in the Baltics, NATO exercises incorporated cyber warfare, electronic defense, and drone integration. Atlantic Resolve had entered a new phase, an era of high-tech deterrence and seamless coordination across land, sea, air, and cyberspace. But amid all the hardware and headlines, there remained the human element, the soldiers whose daily routines carried the weight of global peace. Many were too young to remember the Cold War, yet they stood watch on its modern frontier. They trained in freezing forests, marched through mud and rain thousands of miles from home. Their mission was not to fight, but to prevent a fight from ever starting. Their presence itself was the deterrent. Their discipline, their readiness, their resolve, that was the message to any adversary watching. Ask any of them why they're there, and they'll answer simply, "We're making sure peace stays." In strategy, true deterrence is invisible. It succeeds not through battles won, but through wars never fought. The success of Operation Atlantic Resolve lies in what hasn't happened. For more than a decade, despite provocations and aggression on NATO's doorstep, no NATO member has been attacked. That is deterrence, quiet, constant, and effective. Today, deterrence extends far beyond tanks and trenches. Operation Atlantic Resolve is no longer just a series of troop rotations. It's a network of intelligence, cyber defense and missile shield coordination. Real-time data flows between command centers in Europe and the United States, uniting 31 nations under one strategic umbrella. Satellites scan the skies, radars track the seas, and soldiers on the ground stand ready. It is deterrence for the digital age, faster, smarter, and unrelenting. As of 2025, Operation Atlantic Resolve continues, stronger and more integrated than ever. The lessons of the past decade are written in steel and strategy. Peace must be protected, actively and visibly, by those willing to stand guard. Across Europe, from the Arctic Circle to the Black Sea, NATO troops patrol, train, and coordinate as one force. They are the inheritors of a legacy stretching from the beaches of Normandy to the skies over Berlin, a legacy built not on conquest, but on commitment. They do not prepare for war. They prepare so that war will never come. As dawn breaks over the Baltics, tanks rest silently under the rising sun. Soldiers sip coffee in the chill morning air. The radars hum. The skies are watched. The border remains quiet, because the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And so Operation Atlantic Resolve endures, an operation born of crisis, sustained by unity, and defined by resolve. For more than a decade, it has stood as the visible embodiment of NATO's promise and America's commitment. A living shield across Europe's eastern frontier, it is both a reminder of history and a safeguard for the future. This is Operation Atlantic Resolve, the shield of the West. If you found this story compelling, give this video a like. It helps others discover it. Subscribe for more cinematic deep dives into the operations shaping our world today. And remember, history isn't just the past. It's the warning written for our future.